sorry. That's like nothing to be sorry about, right? You're apologizing for something that is not your fault. So am I only allowing bad things, negativity, pressure to come to me? And can I accept rest? Can I accept love? Can I accept pleasure, gratitude?
What are some practical steps for anyone out there if let's say they are not in a therapy setting? How can they be more aware of what you're feeling inside?
Number one is, am I working harder than my client?
Welcome to Tea Breaks with Therapists, where we brew conversations on mental health one sip at a time. I'm your host Chayan, and in this unique series, we aim to break the stigma surrounding mental health by engaging in bite-sized, insightful interviews with experienced mental health practitioners. So grab your favorite beverage, get cozy, and let's dive into the fascinating world of psychology, one tea break at a time.
And today we have Patience with us, who will be sharing her thoughts on boundaries. So it is a word that is easier said than done. So before we deep dive into the topic, maybe Patience, you could just introduce yourself to all of us here.
Yeah, sure. My name's Patience. I have about 15 years of working experience now. I started my career in the non-profit sector. So I was a teacher for people with special needs. And later on, I joined another non-profit organization doing workshops for young people. So I used to travel around the country to different schools, whether it was government schools or international or private schools, to teach young people the truth about life, love, and sex. Teaching them character-based values, teaching them the value of themselves, their bodies, and I really had a wonderful time with that experience. And in that time, I also got to meet a lot of different people and different students, but I'd see them one time and then I wouldn't see them again. So along the way in that job, I also started going for therapy myself as a client. And so from that experience, I experienced for myself the transformation that can happen when somebody is journeying with you. And so I started to desire that a bit more in my work as well. And so that's really what spurred me to become a counselor myself.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you, Patience. And I think that really would inspire the audience here to also seek for therapy when they need to.
Yeah.
Well, then let's jump right into our topic for today on boundaries. So, Patience, can you let us know a little bit what are the different types of boundaries, or maybe some examples on how we can differentiate all of them?
Yeah, so some common ones would be like physical boundaries, space that you have with each other. Sometimes people, they don't respect your personal space, right? So even coming too close could make people really uncomfortable. Emotion boundaries, so being able to differentiate what's my emotion and what's somebody else's feelings. And often I think in our culture we become enmeshed. So my supervisor calls this becoming mashed potatoes. And one of our jobs in therapy is to help you become your own potato, so to speak. Yeah. Time boundaries, how much time are you willing to invest into something, right? Drawing limits. Other boundaries could be your attitude, right? Your choices, your behaviors. So how much ownership or responsibility are you taking for yourself versus somebody else? Is it your responsibility? One of the most common ones I hear people say, when they're sick, oh, I'm so sorry. That's like nothing to be sorry about, right? You're apologizing for something that is not your fault, so that's not your responsibility. So we don't have to apologize for things that we didn't make a mistake about. Yeah. So those are some key examples.
Thank you, Patience. Now I know a little bit better. So why exactly is it even important to set boundaries?
Yeah, I think it's really important because sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes you feel like your life is out of control, right? Like you don't feel as if you're in charge here. Somebody else is dictating your schedule, somebody else is dictating where you live, how you eat, what you wear. And I think that can lead to a number of things, right? It can lead to resentment, it can lead to burnout, it can lead to passive aggressiveness. People who say, I'm fine, but actually they're not, right?
Guilty again.
And so helping us to take ownership of what belongs to us, and therefore taking ownership of the change or the life that we envision for ourselves, rather than, oh, it will happen someday, or I need XYZ to happen before I can achieve this, right? And sometimes that can push things too much. We delay or we blame others, for our situation. So I think having healthy boundaries helps us to take ownership for what is ours to own, and also give the responsibility to those whom it belongs when it's not ours. So maybe one example is, let's say at work, you have too much on your plate.
Yeah.
And people just assume that, oh, I have to do it because there's nobody else
Yeah.
to do it. Or I have to say yes because, this is my problem. When actually it may be your supervisor's problem to solve because you're overloaded. There's too much on your plate.
Yeah.
And is it your responsibility to prioritize everything? Or do you need to have a discussion together with your team and decide, what's kind of reasonable and humane? Yeah.
Definitely. And I think really boundaries are quite important for us to keep our mental and emotional well-being in check as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I really like what you said, especially in the working field where, no one else is going to do it. My employer asked me to do it. I have to prove my worth. And that's one of the real story for my client. So in Manila, he spoke, kerja dah bagi, tak boleh tolak lah. So, work has been given to me, I can't just push it away. And especially now with, after COVID, streamlining the whole office, cutting down of people. So they are also afraid that if they don't take on the job, most likely that person is not worth the company's value, so then they would get fired. So then all the more they would want to prove their worth. So can you share with us, patients, especially in your own experience as well, why do people find it so challenging to set healthy boundaries?
That's a big question. I think there are a couple of things that come into play when we talk about setting boundaries. So one is, like you mentioned, is our self-worth. So if I say no to somebody, or if they are unhappy with my decision, does that mean that I'm not a worthy person? If I can't stand that, if my ego strength is weak, I'm unable to stand the displeasure of somebody else directed towards me. But if I'm able to see the boundaries clearly, who's responsible for whose feelings, then I'm able to protect my esteem and also acknowledge that this is uncomfortable for this person and I need to allow them to feel the discomfort. I think that's a really key one in why that's difficult, because we've, in our society, in our culture, we've taken on too much responsibility for other people's feelings and completely lose control of our own. Either by repressing, we're very good at doing that, repressing, minimizing, completely ignoring even our own needs sometimes.
Okay, so if I'm hearing correctly, it's a lot of self-worth that comes into play. Hence, it's very challenging. What about in terms of the societal level? We are all living in Malaysia, and Malaysia is more of a collectivistic culture where all we want to do is maintain peace and harmony. If I state my own feelings about certain things, I say, okay, I don't want to take on too much, and then I approach my supervisor and say, oh, I need to cut down a little bit, but that's not maintaining peace and harmony, even for my colleagues as well. If I don't want to help them to do a certain work, that's not maintaining peace and harmony. So why then is it so difficult, and how do we navigate through that?
Sometimes there's not going to be a win-win situation. Sometimes it's going to be win-lose, sometimes it's going to be lose-lose. The important thing to note in a collectivistic culture is that sometimes I'm going to have to sacrifice more. And sometimes other people will need to cover for me. And sometimes it's, okay, we're all in this together, but we know that it's seasonal as well. I think people come to burnout situations when I'm doing it all by myself, or I have no outlet, I'm unable to share. A lot of times people, they just need to be able to express what they're going through, what they're feeling. And I just want to be able to say this, okay, whether it's my responsibility or not. And then I will continue to do the work anyway. So sometimes it could also be a situation like that.
How then do you think all of us here can learn to set healthy boundaries? What are some practical steps that we can actually take? I mean, we know a lot about, set healthy boundaries, but what exactly do we do? What exactly do we say?
Yeah. So for me, prevention is better than cure. So before you get involved with something, I think it's always good to set the expectation before you go into anything. As much as possible, at the get-go of anything, we try to delineate, okay, what is the expectation here? Is this reasonable for everybody, not just some people, on the team? Yeah, and accepting responsibility. So if it's my part, can I take responsibility for this thing? And how much of it am I going to accept responsibility for? And how much of it am I going to say, this doesn't belong to me, this is your jurisdiction, your property, right? So I think those are some things. Being able to communicate, I think, is really important. So people will cross boundaries all the time, okay? And just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean that I don't have boundary issues, okay? I definitely do. I think being able to communicate those boundaries is really important. And sometimes it's not even the people we dislike that we have trouble drawing boundaries with. It's actually the people that we like a lot, that we love and we care for very much, and it's very hard for us to say no to them, right? Or even to say yes to ourselves. That's a very difficult boundary sometimes to draw as well. Am I only allowing bad things, negativity, pressure to come to me? And can I accept rest? Can I accept love? Can I accept pleasure, gratitude? Can I receive those things into my life as well? That's also part of boundaries as well. So I think reflection, setting limits and expectations beforehand, communicating those boundaries, and being flexible to negotiate on boundaries as well. Like I said, sometimes it's high pressure, high stress season, so just being able to pace yourself out. And I think it's unsustainable to be high pressure all the time, right? So it needs to be kind of a balance as well. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. That's a lot of steps. So reflection, setting boundaries, and limit, communication, and being flexible as well. Wow, and I think that's really powerful. I was just reflecting on all the things that has happened to me. And you're right, actually it's harder to say no or setting boundaries with the people that we love and we care about the most. And also, I think in therapy setting, like you mentioned, being therapists, we are not exempted from that.
No.
And I think this is maybe my own personal question, personal curiosity on how then do you set boundaries with clients? Because sometimes I struggle with that. Like, am I doing too much? Am I doing too little?
So there are two key things that I think is very important. And number one is, am I working harder than my client?
Okay.
So I remember hearing this from a coach before, that I will never work harder than my client is willing to work on themselves. So if I'm the one always messaging and like, oh, maybe you can do this and try that, and there's not enough reciprocity on that side, or sometimes clients, they're not ready to really confront their issues just yet, you could be overcompensating. So I think that's just a good way to remind myself once in a while. I'll be like, am I putting in too much effort? Right? Another thing that I do to keep myself in check is actually to go for supervision. So I think that's really important. So for myself, I work with a psychodynamic therapist. It's like more than a decade's worth of experience. And so we talk about not just what is happening, like my client's issue, but I talk about my relationship with my client and how my stuff may come up, right? And there's transference or counter-transference happening in there. And so it's really important for me, I think, to have somebody looking in on my blind spots and asking me, why did you say that? Or what was going on for you? How are you feeling when your client brings up this topic, when I know this about your history? Or your client sits in a certain manner. How did you feel about that? Even stuff like that. So I think that's a really important thing for me, to protect my client at the end of the day. The benefit and the problem of confidentiality is that nobody else knows what's going on. So it's very important for me to bring a more experienced therapist in, so that I can manage those boundaries well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Definitely. So really reflecting and having supervision as well, just to make sure that I'm not doing more than my client.
Yeah, because I think it can get blurred sometimes, because sometimes are you asking your client to do something that's really for their benefit, or is it for you to feel better? I noticed this thing for myself, that sometimes I would be asking my client for feedback about the session, and it was because I felt insecure rather than, is this really serving you? So I have to still be mindful of that, because I'm human, right? So I also have insecurities about, am I doing a good job?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I think especially as well when you don't see the progress of the clients that you want, and you're not sure what's happening, and we're not putting in enough, and then all the more I would stretch myself. Further.
Yes. And is that your expectation, that I think that, oh, my client should be here already? And the client they are where they are, right? Our job is not really to push them, it's to journey with them. So can I be that person who's also not going to push them, and to say, I'm here to hold your hand, and we're going to go wherever it is you need to go together.
Yeah, definitely so important to meet the clients where they are. Okay, okay. And how about for clients themselves? How do we communicate that to them that we also need to set boundaries? Not because they are too dependent on us, but I also have friends who seek therapy, and sometimes they would email their
Therapist.
and say like, oh, I really need to see you and all that, but the therapists don't reply the email, so they feel a little bit offended. And how do we communicate that to the clients?
Yeah, again, as much as possible, set the expectations up front.
Yes.
My working hours are this time to this time. If it's past a certain hour, I will only reply you within what time or where in the day. If it's really an emergency that I deem is an emergency, and you need to kind of spell out what is an emergency. Is that something that's just uncomfortable, or is it really an emergency? So I think that's a responsibility on the therapist's part to kind of spell that out for the client, and to help them to understand that it's not because we don't care, but we also need to be professional, right? Is it professional for me to be responding to your email at midnight? We need to kind of rationalize and draw these things out in conversation with our clients for them to understand. For me, usually if I receive a text, email, it's uncomfortable for me. Trust me, okay? To leave it alone is uncomfortable. But I just resist the urge and I will respond the next day during business hours.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. To prevent myself from feeling like, oh, I cannot just sit with an open email knowing that they're also struggling on their end, I will just really turn off notifications during my off hours.
Yes.
And sometimes the therapists really have not read your email, so to really just wait for a bit.
Yeah, I think if you're really in a situation that you feel it's very difficult at that moment and you may hurt yourself or something bad may happen, you need to have that conversation with your therapist at the next, as quickly as possible during your next session, about what's your safety plan.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you so much, Patience, for sharing. Can you share your personal experiences or examples of how you have helped your own clients to develop and enforce boundaries?
Yeah, so kind of a large part of the sessions at the beginning will be in helping my clients to even identify what it is that they feel. Because if they are unable to see how they are feeling and reacting to those feelings, then it's very hard to draw boundaries. So it's first being able to identify, to acknowledge, to label those feelings, accept those feelings. After I have done all that, then I can decide, do I still want this? Do I still want to live my life in this way? Or do I want to choose differently? But if I don't have this chunk first, I can't move here. So I think that's a large part of it. Some outcomes I've seen from my clients, they move out of their family's home, they leave a bad relationship, they quit their jobs, or they just have better routines, close off work at a certain time. They learn how to speak up for themselves rather than to repress their voice. So those are some outcomes I've seen for my clients.
Sounds like very good work, but when it comes to feelings,
It's hard, yeah, because you can't see it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's intangible.
I think even for myself, I think I struggle with that as well. I always feel that, oh, I'm like a hate person, more rational, emotions get in the way. And I don't know, I don't want to feel the way I feel. And like, you say you don't want to apologize for certain things that we're not responsible for. And I'll just be like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And how then do you help your clients to actually identify? What are some practical steps for anyone out there, if let's say they are not in a therapy setting? How can they be more aware of what you're feeling inside? How do they draw those emotions out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One of the things that I try to help my clients do, and even if they come for therapy, a lot of my clients, they actually say, I don't know what I feel, right? Yeah, they're like, oh, I don't know, right? It's the very common answer. A lot of times, when I ask them how they feel, they tell me what they think.
Right.
Rather than
So
what they
it's so
feel. Yeah, so one of the things I try to start off with is, what is the sensation that you feel in your body? To identify where it is, what kind of sensation is it? Is it warm? Is it tingly? Is it tense? Is it hot? Is it pleasurable? Yeah, and just how does it make you feel, right? Which part of your body is that sensation coming from? And if that body part could speak, what do you think it would say to you? What do you think it's trying to communicate? So that's kind of a good starting point, I think, for a lot of people. Of course, mindfulness exercises. I love to do body scans with my clients, mindful body scans. Just going through the body and just paying attention. I say this word posture. It's very automatic, right? Yeah. I didn't even have to tell you what to do, but you automatically want to adjust your posture. So that's what mindfulness is, just having awareness. And just by bringing it to awareness, you know what to do. Yeah. So I would say that's one of the easy things that people can start to do.
Wow, that is so good. And I think I've learned so much just from a very, very short conversation with patients. And of course, before we come to a close for this episode, is there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah. First of all, I want to pay credit to authors Dr. John Townsend and Dr. Henry Cloud for writing the classic book on boundaries. So if you can get it, please do. And I thought I want to read an excerpt from Dr. Henry Cloud's book called Changes That Heal.
Wow.
And he talks about what is it like to live with no boundaries. Yeah. So this conversation is happening between the therapist, Dr. Henry Cloud, and one of his clients. Why don't you just tell your mother that you don't want to come home for Thanksgiving? You're 30 years old. That's old enough to choose to spend a holiday with your friends, I said. But that would make her very angry, Sandy replied. I could never do that. It's mean. How can you make her angry? Sandy replied. Why do you think you have that much power? I asked. If I didn't go home for the holidays, that would make her mad. It's as simple as that. Then I guess you think that you have the power to make her happy as well. Is that right? I wondered aloud. Well, of course, Sandy replied. If I do what she wants, I can make her happy. You're a very powerful woman, I said. It must be frightening to have that much power. But if you're so powerful, why don't you have the power to make yourself feel good? I don't know the answer to that. That's why I came to see you, so you can make me feel better. Oh, I see. Making your mother feel good makes you feel bad. Then you come to see me and I'll make you feel good. What am I supposed to do if that makes me feel bad? I asked. Maybe I could call your mother and she could make me feel better. You're crazy, she said. How's she going to make you feel better? I don't know, I answered, but as long as everyone is responsible for everyone else's feelings, I'm sure she would try to find a way. Imagine what it must feel like to live a life of being responsible for someone else's feelings and out of control of your own. If we look at Sandy's situation more closely, we see a basic problem. She did not know where her responsibility ended and her mother's began. In short, she did not have a life apart from her mother's. This is the essence of boundaries. Where do I end and where does someone else begin? Wow. So good, right?
So good.
Get this book, okay? It's really good.
So powerful, and I think it just encompasses the whole definition of what boundary is.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patience, for your time. And for all those out there, if you feel it's so hard to set healthy boundaries, or if you know someone who finds difficulty in doing that, feel free to save this video to watch later or just share it out in your social media. So we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for your time and attention. Bye.
Bye.